I see like 3, 4 niggas running through the crib, all black, mask on, running through the crib and shit. One nigga run to the front door. I hop out, I start shooting. Bow, 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 bow. Shot the nigga. Bow, shot his ass. Bow, 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 bow. All the niggas run out the door. They run out the door. This nigga on the floor.
The paper trail. Let's go, 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 go. Yeah, 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 yeah. For the love of money, niggas come around. For the love of money, some stay around. For the love of money, what a nigga will do. For the love of the money. Yeah. I gotta shake it 12 at night to 5 in the morning. They don't give a fuck now. If it's for the money, niggas gon' bark and they bite like a motherfucking dog. Gotta party like a motherfucking dog. For that cat, I am gon' roof. And I'm barking at that cat, and I am gon' take the roof off. When I'm riding that ride, real leaning to the left, but I'm steady on the only right. I'm swerving with a purpose. A nigga been sipping on that purple. A nigga been cheaping on that purple. Cause I'm getting money, I'm getting money. Cause I'm getting money. And I'm laughing all the way to the motherfucking bank. And I'm telling her, tell me later if she thinking what I'm thinking. Damn me getting money. I woke up.
Oil rig or offshore platform is a large structure that is used to extract oil or natural gas in the rock beneath the seabed. An offshore oil rig or offshore platform is a large structure that is used to extract oil or natural gas in the rock beneath the seabed. In deep water up to 1,700 feet, fixed platform will be used. The platform is held in place by large steel or concrete legs that attach to the ocean floor. From 1,500 to 4,900 feet, a taller fixed platform called a compliant tower will be used. For deep water, up to 12,000 feet, floating oil rigs will be used. There are several types of floating oil platform in use. In this video, we are using a semi-submersible platform as an example. This platform is supported on large pontoons. These pontoons provide buoyancy, allow the unit to float and be towed from location to location. Some oil rigs are also equipped with propellers under the pontoons. Anchors will be used to secure the rig in a designated spot. Once on the location, the pontoon structure is slowly flooded to keep them below the sea level. The workdecks float on top of the water, while the vast majority of their mass is below the water surface. Without the pontoons being submerged under the water, the platform will be unstable when the sea is rough. Let's take a look at what's on the oil rig. This is a hoisting system. It is used to raise and lower the drill string. There are cranes. They are used for transporting supplies between ship and the oil rig. Living quarters. This is where the crew members stay, eat, and sleep. Helicopter pad. Crew members will be transported using helicopter. Emergency lifeboats. An escape plan for crew member in case of any dangerous situations. A lot of liquid tanks that can be used to store water or fuel such as diesel. Diesel is used for power. Flare stack. Flare stacks are often used for burning off flammable gas. Extracted oil might contain gas. This gas must be separated and burned off to avoid any possible explosion. Let's go to the main purpose of an oil rig, which is to drill and get oil out of the seabed. Oil lies under so many layers of rock underneath the seabed. The hoisting system is used to lower down the drill to the seabed. Drill bit is placed inside a big pipe called a casing. This top part
Bang bang. Oil is infinite if you got the tools to get it. Level. As you can see, you have to be on a level surface in order to have your tools work to get that infinite juice. This is way deeper than what we think. The illusion. No pun intended when I said this is way deeper than what we think. Abyss like, I mean, way deeper. Just know that oil is infinite if you got the tools to get it. Now, some of these other countries are using American tools to get it. Some of these other countries or other places are using the American tools to get it. Why do you think that the dollar is the backbone of the oil industry? And if you try to stray away from that, now that's what the deck of cards could be showing as far as if things were real, is real, is it real? Now, if things were real, or maybe they want to show that throughout this storyline or theater, they want to show a backbone to it. Well, the overall backbone would be that you can't use any other currency to maneuver this oil, we'll call it, which is infinite if you got the tools to get it. So we'll just say that. Yeah. And if we taught you how to get it, you can only use the Federal Reserve note in exchange. So we're only using the Federal Reserve note if you're using oil, no matter where you at in the country, basically. And it's because the knowledge of that seems to have come from the Americas. So this looks like what's going on at the same time. Or it could be a great escape plan for a group of people to always have a fallback plan in case the plan that they pre-planned don't go as planned. The fallback plan is even more spectacular. Now you see it, now you don't type movie type theatrics. Yeah. But bitch, I'm in the score. And my music is off the fucking Richter. Just notice. You have to be within a contained environment in order to get that renewable, replenishable itself juice from Mother Earth. Can I get a bang bang? Bang bang.
Part of the casing is a wellhead. When touching the bottom of the sea, the drill starts drilling down. If the casing goes down deep enough, it will stay and the drill bit will keep going down further. The drill bit will be pulled out of the hole, then smaller casing will be installed. Cement is pumped down, followed by mud, and a plug is used to separate cement and mud. The plug is pushed down to ensure the cement covers the outside of the casing and secure it permanently. This process repeats when drilling down deeper as the casing gets smaller. When drilling goes closer to the oil, a very important device called a blowout preventer will be installed on top of the wellhead. This device's purpose is to prevent any unwanted accident caused by high pressure oil coming out of the ground. Oil may come out with an extreme pressure. This is called kick. Kicks can lead to a potentially catastrophic event known as a blowout. A blowout preventer has two annulars and multiple pipe rimes. Annulars are designed in a donut shape. When it is tightened, it can seal the well and prevent oil from coming up. Pipe rimes are also used to control pressure or seal the well to prevent oil coming up. There's one ram called blind shear ram. It is equipped with a steel blade. In case high pressure oil comes into the drill string, this ram closes and steel blade can cut off the drill string and then seal the well permanently. Blowout preventers must be tested carefully before putting in use because any mistake can cause human casualties and environmental disasters such as oil spill. When oil is extracted successfully from underneath the seabed, it will be pumped into a pipeline and delivered into facilities on pipelines. There's a whole network of subsea pipelines. For example, this is a subsea pipeline map in the Gulf of Mexico. Thank you for watching this video. If you find this interesting, subscribe to my channel. My name is Lucius and I'll see you in the next video.
Friends, in today's video, we'll explore how crude oil is extracted from the seabed using 3D
Now, check it. Take it into mind that, when they say like things are going so deep to the seabed, mind you, it's not as deep as they say it is. Like saying like what did they say, like 1,500 feet. I think he said 12,000 feet would have been the deepest. Now, knowing that like a mile is like what, 5,280 feet. So yeah, 1 mile, which takes me about 6 minutes to jog a mile. So 1 mile deep is at 5,280 feet. All right. So if they're saying that something is 1,500 feet, we know that's not a mile deep. Now, the deepest place within the ocean that we know of is about 7 miles deep, give or take eight, almost eight, but it's about 7 miles deep, deepest place within the ocean. So these guys at 12,000 feet, you would be at roughly 2 miles at 12,000 feet, since 5,280 feet is 1 mile. So if you're only 12 miles deep getting oil from the ocean, if you're only 12,000 feet getting this oil from the seabed of that part of the ocean, well, that part of the ocean sea floor at level standing, that level part of the ocean before it rises or goes deeper in depth is 12,000 feet where you're able to get oil from, which is about 2 miles deep. Just keeping up with what's going on here and the overall factor of, we're going to get into it. We're just talking oil. It's infinite. If you got the tools to get it, you got it. Huh? But who had the tools to get it before the Americans created the tools to get it? Because what's the functioning behind the dollar being behind every barrel of oil being sold? So, okay, Russia, you think you're winning, you still, okay, so somehow you're still going to have to use that Federal Reserve note, Russia. That's how I know that either you guys are slapping five in the back fucking room or you guys are slapping five in our face. Because the ultimate winner is still the Federal Reserve System, because you're still having to pay for each barrel of oil with that American dollar. And I just find it quite strange that they're making all this money, but they're in this big ass debt. And then the debt is supposed to be on the people as far as the government is saying, because we should be getting checks from all, that's the debt you owe the public. The people that keep these businesses running in these local areas. So what happens? Where is that? What happens to the funds that are made overseas at these businesses with this oil? Do we get any of that money? Do we get any kickback for us saying that you're gonna use the? Who's getting the kickback? Somebody's getting the fucking kickback, and we ain't talking on the oil rig. And much safety to these guys out here. These are dangerous ass jobs, mind you. So hats off. Shit is not a game. Yeah, but let's dive deep. Sure. A1 swimmer. Better than Phelps.
First, Friends, in today's video, we'll explore how crude oil is extracted from the seabed using 3D. First, a drilling rig is lowered from the hoisting system. Then, it is inserted into a large steel pipe called a casing. When the casing pipe touches the seabed, it begins drilling. Pressurized water is then pumped into the casing pipe, flushing out any dirt. After extending some distance into the seabed, the casing pipe stops, and the drill rig moves deeper. The drill rig is then removed and the casing pipe is inserted into it. The casing is secured by pouring cement and mud over it. The oil pressure is then reduced by installing a blowout preventer at the wellhead of the casing pipe, and the crude oil is delivered to onshore facilities via a pipeline.
Jainuri processes the oil at this artisanal refinery. Carrying 20-pound containers filled with crude up and down these hills. He dumps them into these 60-gallon drums. First, Jainuri lights this underground furnace. He'll use it to heat the crude in this drum. He fills it halfway to give it space to boil. It has to reach at least 570 degrees Fahrenheit before it starts evaporating. The vapor comes up through these pipes, which are cooled with water. That turns the vapor back into a liquid. They bring that refined fuel to the boiler and heat it once more, until it evaporates back through these pipes. Jainuri repeats this process 3 or 4 times to get different types of fuel, like gasoline and diesel. All day long, workers here are breathing these fumes, a combination of nitrogen, methane, and carbon monoxide, which can cause cancer and brain damage. And if the gases get trapped underground, everything could explode. And an entire day's work only fetches about 1 drum of diesel. That's about enough to fill a car 3 times.
Did you know that America hasn't built a major new oil refinery in over 50 years, all while we've been caught in a completely massive amounts of high-quality, light, sweet crude oil? But there is a massive problem that most people simply don't realize. Because our existing refineries are old, tired, and were originally designed decades ago to process heavy foreign oil blends, we have been forced to ship our own premium resources across the ocean to Asia and other foreign countries. Those countries then turn our American oil into fuel and sell it right back to us at a premium. It is a cycle that makes zero sense for the American economy. Did you know that America hasn't built a major new oil refinery in over 50 years, all while we've been caught in a completely ridiculous energy loop? For more than a decade, the United States has been producing massive amounts of high-quality, light, sweet crude oil. But there is a massive problem that most people simply don't realize. Because our existing refineries are old, tired, and were originally designed decades ago to process heavy foreign oil blends, we have been forced to ship our own premium resources across the ocean to Asia and other foreign countries. Those countries then turn our American oil into fuel and sell it right back to us at a premium. It is a cycle that makes zero sense for the American economy, but that is all about to change, thanks to a groundbreaking project currently underway in the Rio Grande Valley. America First Refining is officially building the first new refinery in half a century right in the heart of Texas. This is not just about bragging rights or being the biggest. It is about finally fixing a broken system is officially building the first new refinery in half a century right in the heart of Texas. Not just about bragging rights or being the biggest. It is about finally fixing a broken system that has drained our resources for years. Instead of sending our wealth and our energy overseas, the goal is simple. We produce it here and we refine it here. Founder John Calci spent 10 years of his life and his own blood, sweat, and tears to bring this vision to reality because he saw the massive price gap between the oil we pull out of the ground in places like West Texas and what we are actually able to process domestically. By the time this massive facility is fully operational in 2029, it is going to provide truly affordable American-made fuel for the American populace and create a surge of high-paying jobs in Brownsville and throughout the valley. We are finally building the modern infrastructure necessary to stop relying on foreign entities to do our work for us. This is how we reclaim energy independence and ensure that American resources benefit the American working man first. This refinery will be like nothing else ever built, proving that we can still innovate and build big in this country. If you want to stay updated on the biggest moves in American industry,
refining begins with a process called distilling. After oil is superheated, it becomes vapor. The vapor is fed into the distillation unit. Refining begins with a process called distilling. After oil is superheated, vapor. The vapor is fed into the distillation unit. As it rises and cools, the vapor turns back into a liquid. Using stacks of trays, it is easily collected and separated by weight. The lighter and medium weight liquids require less processing before they're ready to be used in cars and trucks. The heavier liquids need more processing to become useful. Is used to minimize the usefulness of heavy oil. Heavy oil has long strings of carbon and hydrogen molecules. Using a catalyst, these molecules can be broken into smaller chains, transforming Using stacks of trays, the liquid is easily collected and separated by weight. The lighter and medium weight liquids require less processing before they're ready to be used in cars and trucks. The heavier liquids need more processing to become useful. A process called cracking is used to maximize the usefulness of heavy oil. Heavy oil has long strings of carbon and hydrogen molecules. Using a catalyst, these molecules can be broken into smaller chains, transforming the heavy oil into lighter, more valuable fluids. Reforming is a process that increases the amount of gasoline produced from crude oil. One of the products separated in the distilling process is a liquid called naphtha. The number of carbon atoms in naphtha is about the same as the number found in gasoline, but their structure is more complex. Reforming rearranges the naphtha molecule, turning it into a usable, gasoline-like molecule. Blending. Grades of gasoline used: pump, regular, mid-grade, gasoline, for example, is blended to achieve octane standards, creating the grades of gasoline you see at the pump: regular, mid-grade, and premium, that are necessary to meet the needs of specific engine types. Treating is a process used to produce cleaner gasoline, which helps protect both the environment and our health. Gasoline molecules contain impurities like sulfur that can be removed. When the molecules are heated and come in contact with a special catalyst, a chemical reaction occurs that strips the sulfur away. These sulfur compounds are used as fertilizers and in pharmaceuticals. Nothing goes to waste in a refinery.
You hear oil than ever, great. So why do we still import millions of barrels of crude every single day? Why is some of our own vacier and more bizarre than you probably expect? Later, I'll show you one law you've never heard of that makes it cheaper to ship oil from Saudi Arabia to New York than from Texas to New York. Yes. Really. Let's jump into the second best reason first. Chapter 1, Oil Type Mismatch, Light versus Heavy. Most Americans assume all oil is the same. It's not. Common belief. We produce enough oil, so we must be using it. Contrarian flip. We do produce. Here's the deal. U.S. shale fields, Permian Basin, Bakken, etc. produce mostly light, sweet crude, high quality, low sulfur, easier to refine into gasoline. Sounds great, right? But many of our refineries, especially older ones built in the 70s, 80s, were configured for heavy, sour crude. That kind comes from abroad. You hear it all the time. America is energy independent. We produce more oil than ever, great. So why do we still import millions of barrels of crude every single day? Why is some of our own oil literally more valuable overseas than in our own backyard? That's what we're unpacking today. And spoiler alert, the story is way messier and more bizarre than you probably expect. Later, I'll show you one law you've never heard of that makes it cheaper to ship oil from Saudi Arabia to New York than from Texas to New York. Yes, really. Let's jump into the second best reason first. Chapter 1, Oil Type Mismatch, Light versus Heavy. Most Americans assume all oil is the same. It's not. Common belief. We produce enough oil, so we must be using it. Contrarian flip. We do produce a ton of oil. It's just the wrong kind for many U.S. refineries. Here's the deal. U.S. shale fields, Permian Basin, Bakken, etc. produce mostly light, sweet crude, high quality, low sulfur, easier to refine into gasoline. Sounds great, right? But many of our refineries, especially older ones built in the 70s, 80s, were configured for heavy, sour crude. That kind comes from abroad, Venezuela, Mexico, etc. They handle more sulfur, more density. They're built to do that heavy lifting. So what happens? We export a lot of our light crude because buyers overseas will pay good money for it. But we import heavy crude that matches what our refineries expect. Crazy, right? Upgrading a refinery to process a different type of crude isn't just flipping a switch. We're talking hundreds of millions, sometimes billions, of dollars in capital, permits, and environmental checks. That mismatch alone means a huge chunk of domestically produced oil might not be worth the cost to refine here. Chapter 2, Infrastructure and Logistics, Why Moving Oil is Harder Than It Sounds. Here's part 2 of the puzzle. Geography, pipelines, shipping laws, and logistics make using our own oil less trivial. Take where much of the oil is produced, the Permian Basin in Texas and New Mexico inland. But many of the refineries are located near coastlines or built around older supply lines. Transporting oil across states through aging or limited pipelines, trucking, or rail can cost more than simply importing crude via ship to a port. In some cases, it's faster, easier, or cheaper to bring in foreign crude than haul it across half the US. One law adds flavor to this absurdity. The Jones Act. It mandates that goods moved between US ports must be shipped on US-built, US-owned, and US-crewed vessels. Those ships are far more expensive to operate than foreign tankers. That makes domestic coastal shipping even of oil disproportionately costly. As a result, Certain coastal refineries end up relying on imported crude instead of domestic oil simply because of shipping inefficiencies, even though US oil may be physically closer. Also, some pipeline projects have been blocked politically or delayed indefinitely. No new pipeline means no cheap route. Keystone 40, local permit battles, environmental opposition, all of it plays a role. Finally, many refineries are already operating near capacity. Building new pipelines or refineries is enormously costly and politically toxic. Chapter 3: Economic Incentives and Global Trade. Okay, if you can sell your light crude overseas for a premium, you might choose export over domestic refining. Consider that exporting light crude global trade. Okay, day, economics often overrides patriotism. Oil is a global commodity. Buyers, refiners, pay for what they need, type, quality, price. If you can sell your light crude overseas for a premium over domestic refining, consider that exporting light crude to countries with refineries tuned for it may yield better profit margins than selling it to refineries would have to pay extra to handle it. For some, US refineries import heavier crude at a lower delivered price even with shipping and import fees than spending money to retrofit or expand capacity to process domestic oil. It's a weird equilibrium abroad. Oil's regulatory acted infrastructure. Investors weigh long timelines, lawsuits, environment. It's a weird equilibrium. Export what you can sell abroad, import what works better locally. Also, regulatory and permitting uncertainty increases the risk of investment in new or adapted infrastructure versus stable international buyers ready to take the oil now. Another piece, politics and diplomacy. Importing oil from certain countries or maintaining trade ties via energy can be part of broader geopolitical strategy. Exporting heavily to others builds leverage. Chapter 4, Regulation, Environment and Permitting Barriers. Even if economics lined up perfectly, another layer of friction slows or halts action. Regulation. Permitting for refineries is expensive and time-consuming. Upgrading or adjusting feedstock means obtaining environmental reviews, emissions permits, and state and federal approvals. Local opposition, not in my backyard, can kill or delay expansion. Plus, over the past decades there's been growing political pressure to limit fossil fuel expansion entirely. Pipelines are blocked for climate concerns, moratoria on oil infrastructure appear, stricter emissions rules pile on, and corporations grow risk-averse. Even though the US is a top oil producer, public sentiment and federal regulation mean that building new refineries or upgrading old ones is not straightforward. Add to that tax policy, federal versus state jurisdiction, and uncertain long-term regulations like carbon pricing, it all makes infrastructure investment risky. Chapter 5. What it means for energy independence and you. So what's the bottom line? America isn't oil poor. We're oil rich. But that doesn't equal oil-usable at home without headaches. We might think we're energy independent. But because of all these mismatches, type of oil, infrastructure, regulation, cost, we remain interdependent. We export and import simultaneously. For consumers, that means gas prices, supply shocks, and policy debates aren't just about drilling more wells, they're about where and how we move that oil, which oil we use, and whether it's financially viable to change any of that. Attempts to become more independent by building more pipelines, upgrading refineries, or changing shipping laws run headfirst into political fights over environment, local impact, and climate goals. Still, some changes are possible. Targeted refinery upgrades, smarter pipeline, reforming shipping rules, or trade policy shifts. But every option has trade-offs, cost, delay, and backlash. So there you have it. America drills millions of barrels of oil daily. We're one of the world's largest producers. Yet in many cases, that oil doesn't power our own cars, run our own refineries, or heat our own homes. The reason isn't some grand conspiracy. It's not just politics. It's a tangled web of infrastructure lethargy, economic incentives, regulatory friction, and global trade logic. If you liked watching me unravel this paradox, you'll probably want to see my deep dive on which US pipelines should be built or stopped next. I'll link that next up. Hit that subscribe button. Leave me a comment. What surprised you most about this oil paradox? I'm glad you stuck around. Hope you feel smart.
You're watching Subject Soup, where every episode is a shot of curiosity. I'm Steven, and today we're diving. Let's slurp the fact. The United States produces more crude oil than any other nation, yet it still imports millions of barrels daily. This puzzling fact reveals a structural paradox within America's energy system. Oil is not uniform. Crude can be light or heavy, sweet or sour. Most U.S. refineries were built decades ago to handle heavier crude grades. During invested heavily in complex equipment that could break down dense sulfur. You're watching Subject Soup, where every episode is a shot of curiosity. And today we're diving into another great topic. Think you know it? Think again. Let's slurp the facts. The United States produces more crude oil than any other nation, yet it still imports millions of barrels daily. This ago to handle heavier crude grades. During the 1970s and 1980s, American refiners invested in Canada.
Hold up, check ball. Check ball. Yeah. Let me refresh. Bang, bang.
I'm Steve, and today we're diving into another great topic. Think you know it? Think again. Let's The United States produces more crude oil than any other nation, yet it still imports millions of barrels daily. This puzzling fact reveals a structural paradox within America's energy system. Oil is not uniform. Crude can be light or heavy, sweet or sour, and each type demands a refinery calibrated to its chemistry. Most U.S. refineries were built decades ago to handle heavier crude grades. During the 19th, unlocked vast reserves of light, sweet crude from the Permian and Bakken formations. Suddenly, the U.S. was awash in coast. According to the Energy Information Administration, most U.S. output now exceeds 45 degrees API gravity, while nearly 70%. These technical mismatches mean many refineries cannot run efficiently on the new domestic oil. But not for the complex ones that dominate the American Gulf Coast. According for much heavier crude streams. These technical mismatches mean many refineries cannot run efficiently on the new domestic oil without lowering throughput or investing billions in equipment to adapt to the lighter feedstock. So while Texas pumps record volumes, refineries on the Gulf Coast still import heavy crude from Canada and operating at full efficiency. Imports therefore fill a quality gap rather than a supply gap. Heavy crude allows refineries to produce more diesel and jet fuel, while the surplus light crude is exported to buyers that prefer it. After Congress lifted the crude export ban in 2000, light crude surged to Europe and Asia, reshaping global trade flows. This integration turned U.S. oil into a global commodity. Prices for domestic barrels now follow international benchmarks like Brent, meaning Americans still feel global price shocks at the pump. Infrastructure adds another layer to the paradox. Much of America's new oil comes from inland basins far from the coast, while many refineries are located on or near port. Rail routes and storage terminals often cannot move oil efficiently from producing regions to the specific refineries that could use it. Bottlenecks create regional price distortions. The Jones Act compounds the issue. This 1920 shipping law requires goods moved between U.S. ports to travel on vessels built, owned, and crewed by Americans.
So basically, what's going on here is that our oil is premium. We need the dirty gunky oil for some odd damn reason from overseas, which we don't. Pay attention to the story. I'm being sarcastic. For sure I am. I'm being so sarcastic, it ain't even so funny. So we need dirty oil so we can put it through our machinery to refine it. Because what we get out of our ground is premium. So we ship our premium shit to these guys that got the machines to refine it overseas. Of course, there's a backdoor deal, some tomfoolery going down behind closed doors. All these numbnuts are slapping Will Smith high fives with a thumb to the back with Jazzy Jeff. Like, y'all cool.
Yakub been doing this for quite some time. Mind you, that this WWE match that we're going through, that they're trying to put all on the table as being the backbone of it. No, this is a story that was written quite some time ago. It's more than just oil. It's more than just snatching up uh, underagers. It's more than is so much more to this story. Because I hope that we all do know where a lot of these people come from in Germany. Germany, prostitution is legal. A brothel is legal. A pasha, I think it's called a pasha in Germany. What? They have a whole house hotel out there. It's legal. They got to pay tax. You want to take this? You got to take that tax payment. Yeah. They got to pay tax. Yeah. You want to be part? You want to work at the brothel? Yeah. You're gonna be paying tax. That's a real ass job. What? What? Boy, what? Oh, they be like, yeah, pay me. Or however they fuck they said, but I think it's called a pasha. It's totally legal out there. You wonder why that shit is found in America in so much abundance amongst them doing it that way. They feel like it's not a crime. They really feel like it's not a crime. They do without Wilt types mindset. It's not a crime to these people. That's their setting. That's their mindset. It's bigger than just oil. Why the fuck is America digging all up in they shit? Digging all up in we digging all up America and sending the shit overseas or wherever else we're sending it. We're not even using our own oil that we going to do all that work for because we got old oil refinery machine. That sounds very weird when we didn't gave Venezuela some very what do you call it beautifully machines out there. I think he said beautifully. I think he gave something that was already an adjective. Anyway, check it. All it's bigger than the oil. The oil will replenish itself. It's abiotic. It's never going anywhere. Oil is infinite. If you got the tools to get it, it's infinite.
Reports of light sweet crude surge to Europe and Asia. Commodity prices for domestic barrels now follow international benchmarks like Brent, meaning Americans still feel global price shocks at the pump. Infrastructure adds another layer to the paradox. Much of American basins far from the coast, while many refineries are located on or near ports built for ports. Rail routes and storage terminals often cannot move oil if shipping law requires.
The US has a stinky problem. It's hiding underground. Here is a hint. These pipes. These are old oil and the US has a stinky problem. It's hiding underground. Here is a hint. These pipes. These are old oil and gas wells that companies abandoned, mostly after going bankrupt. And now they can't be held accountable for cleaning up this mess. And that's not even the biggest problem. Unplugged wells like these leak nasty methane and other toxic stuff. There are around 2 million abandoned and unplugged oil and gas wells all over the country. One way to make things better is to at least plug them, for example with cement. It's really expensive but can stop the methane leaks. So Biden promised to provide billions of dollars for that, acknowledging that
Oil does not come from dinosaurs. There's this common dinosaurs like the T-Rex or the fossil fuels in this case doesn't refer to just large vertebrate fossils like the dinosaurs, but in many cases it actually refers to small invertebrate fossils. That's animals without a backbone. And in the case of oil, that's actually these microfossils. Well, we have some pretty large oil does not come from dinosaurs. There's this common misconception that the gasoline or the oil that you put in your car actually comes from dinosaurs like the T-Rex or the Triceratops. This is because we call them fossil fuels. Now, fossil fuels in this case doesn't refer to just large vertebrate fossils like the dinosaurs, but in many cases it actually refers to small invertebrate fossils. That's animals without a backbone. And in the case of oil, that's actually these microfossils. Well, we have some pretty large scale models of these microfossils above me. What you're looking at here is a dinoflagellate. Over there is a radiolarian, that's that spiky ball. And then next to it, the kind of disc, that right there is a diatom. Now, these are tiny animals. They're either planktonic, which means they float on the surface of the water, plankton, or they're benthic, and they kind of grow on the bottom of the ocean floor, right? These organisms make their bodies out of calcium carbonate or calcite or silica and glass. It's SiO2, almost like the same chemical structure as quartz. Now, eventually, just like anything, these animals will die, and they'll either stay at the bottom of the ocean floor or they'll kind of fall and settle down. When in the right types of conditions, these animals that land at the ocean floor will get covered up gradually. They're going to build up down there. Then with enough time, heat, and pressure, they're going to change through a process that we call diagenesis, and they're going to become the natural gas that Houston, Texas, and the world relies on right now as a major energy source.
Nowadays, houses and offices are also built from them. And when nothing else is left, they are melted down to extract steel. Because next time you pass by a port and see steel containers stacked on top of each other, remember they are not just scrap, but a unique story of the world's unbalanced economy. Now let's come to the question that confuses even the smartest minds. If America is the world's largest oil producer, then why can't it use its own oil? If we look at the world map, America is currently number one in oil production. Saudi Arabia and Russia are behind it. But surprisingly, despite producing so much oil, America is also the world's second largest oil importer. That means it sells its own oil and buys from others for its own use. There are three major secrets behind this. The first reason is the difference in oil. Not all oil is the same. The oil that comes out of American land is called light crude oil. It is light oil whose viscosity is low. But the problem is that America's old refineries are built to refine heavy crude oil. These refineries were built when America used to import thick oil from Mexico and Venezuela.
Everyone keeps saying America is energy independent, so why on earth are we still importing millions of barrels of oil from Canada? There's a hidden chemical reason that people completely miss, and it's why US refineries would literally shut down within weeks if we stopped the flow from the north. Here's the reality that the headlines rarely explain. Energy independence is mostly an accounting identity. It means that in aggregate, the United States produces approximately as much energy as it consumes in total volume. But at the physical refinery level, oil isn't just oil. You can't just swap one type for another. Think of it like a car engine. You cannot put diesel into a gasoline engine and expect it to run, even if both are technically fuel. American shale oil, which has exploded in production over the last decade, is what's known as light sweet crude. However, the massive multi-billion-dollar refinery complexes on the American Gulf Coast were specifically engineered and configured to process heavy sour crude, which is the exact type of oil that comes from Canada's oil sands. These products have fundamentally different chemical properties. Mark Carney recently highlighted that this isn't a matter of preference or convenience. It is a strict chemical requirement of the refining process. You physically cannot run these refineries on American shale oil alone because they aren't built for it. Currently, the United States imports 60% of its crude oil from Canada. This integrated supply chain is so critical that if the pipeline stopped flowing, 6 American states would likely go dark, and the entire refining sector would face an immediate crisis. As Warren Buffett famously warned, if you start with bad data, you end with catastrophic outcomes every single time. Refusing to acknowledge the chemistry of our own energy sector is the definition of starting with bad data. We are physically tethered to Canadian energy to keep our gas stations running and our economy stable. If you want the real truth behind the trade war and the numbers that the politicians aren't telling you, you need to stay informed. Press the follow button right now and check the link in the bio for the full breakdown of the data.
To the surprise of many, the United States is actually the world's largest oil producer. That's right. Bigger than Saudi Arabia, bigger than Russia, and bigger than any of the countries people usually associate with massive oil production. And here's where it gets even more interesting. In the past year alone, the U.S. produced an average of 21 million barrels of petroleum per day. At the same time, Americans only consumed about 20 million barrels per day. That means, in theory, there's more than enough oil being pumped out of U.S. soil to cover the country's entire energy needs. Yet, despite this, the U.S. still imports millions of barrels of oil from other countries. In fact, a big chunk of those imports come from OPEC nations, the same group of oil-producing countries that are famous for controlling global supply and prices. So that raises a big question. If the U.S. produces enough oil to be self-sufficient, why does it continue to rely on foreign oil? Why does America still import oil from the Middle East, from Venezuela, from Canada? And on top of that, why does the U.S. export other countries? If the goal is energy independence, wouldn't it make more sense to keep American oil in America? This is where things start to get complicated. The oil industry doesn't work in the way most people assume. It's not as simple as, we produce oil, so we use our own oil. The reality is shaped by a mix of history, global politics, economic strategy, and even the specific types of oil being pumped out of the ground. So let's take a step back and break down the paradox of American oil.
Why does Venezuela's oil matter so much to America? Let's break it down step by step. Right here in South America, Venezuela sits on the world's biggest oil, more than Saudi Arabia's 267 billion, and way ahead of America's own 69 billion. On paper, now look at the map. Venezuela's oil fields are right on the Caribbean coast, just a short trip north across the sea, and you hit the U.S. Gulf Coast, home to some of America's biggest refineries. Whoever controls this oil controls a... Why does Venezuela's oil matter so much to America? Let's break it down step by step. Right here in South America, Venezuela sits on the world's biggest oil treasure, around 300 billion barrels, worth more than $21 trillion. That's more than Saudi Arabia's 267 billion, and way ahead of America's own 69 billion. On paper, now look at the map. Venezuela's oil fields are right on the Caribbean coast, just a short trip north across the sea, and you hit the U.S. Gulf Coast, home to some of America's biggest refineries. Whoever controls this oil controls a jackpot right in America's backyard. If Venezuela freely sells oil, the market floods with cheap supply. Prices crash. That hurts America's own shale oil industry. By keeping Venezuela locked under sanctions, the U.S. and its Middle Eastern allies keep demand and prices in their favor. Geographically, Venezuela is too close to ignore. Control here means secure supply for the U.S.
The United States have so much oil, then why the U.S. relies heavily on stable. This dependence started in 1945, when President Roosevelt and King Abdulaziz agreed on a deal: U.S. military protection in exchange for oil supply. In 1974, the petrodollar agreement required Saudi Arabia to sell oil only in U.S. dollars, making the dollar the world's dominant currency. If the United States have so much oil, then why the U.S. relies heavily on Saudi Arabia? The U.S. produces more oil than any other country, yet it relies on Saudi Arabia to keep global prices stable. This dependence started in 1945, when President Roosevelt and King Abdulaziz agreed on a deal: U.S. military protection in exchange for oil supply. In 1974, the petrodollar agreement required Saudi Arabia to sell oil only in US dollars, making the dollar the world's dominant currency. Saudi Arabia controls 17% of global oil reserves and leads OPEC, deciding how much oil is produced. In 2022, after Russia invaded Ukraine, oil prices surged, forcing the US to negotiate with Saudi Arabia to increase production. But Saudi Arabia rejected, and prices got skyrocketed throughout the US. Even with record US oil output, Saudi Arabia's control over OPEC and oil pricing makes it impossible for the US to dictate Saudi Arabia.
What's the deal with U.S. gold? Producers in the world, but here's the kicker. Not all of that oil stays in the country. Why? It's all about the type of oil. U.S. refineries are set up to process heavy crude oil, which mostly comes from other countries. But guess what? The U.S. produces a ton of light, sweet crude oil, which isn't a great match for those refineries. So what happens? America exports that light oil and imports heavier oil from places like Canada and Venezuela. It's a bit like shipping out oranges to import apple juice. Makes you think, right? So next time you fill up your tank, remember this quirky twist in the tale of U.S. oil. Crazy, huh? Like and subscribe for more mind-blowing facts.
This is the amount of oil produced per amount of oil was formed. Many people believe that oil comes from the bodies or fossils of dinosaurs, but this is not true. Petroleum is formed when the remains of ancient aquatic organisms that deposited on the ocean floor are transformed into crude oil by the Earth's heat and pressure. Occasionally, this crude oil seeps to the surface through cracks in the ground, forming oil pools.
Watch this. Black liquid bursting out of the pipe. That's crude oil. Black gold, and you use it all day without realizing it. Drop crude oil in and everything separates by heat. At the very top comes gas. Put it in a tank, only a small part of the oil, but it keeps cars, trucks, and the entire modern world moving. Lower down is kerosene. This is what jet engines burn. Below that is diesel. Excavators, tractors, heavy machines, anything that works hard runs on this. Near the bottom, the oil turns thick like syrup. That's heavy fuel oil. Ships and power plants love it because it's powerful and cheap. The very bottom becomes asphalt. Heat it, spread it, and it turns into the roads you walk on. But the most ignored part is right in the middle, naphtha. It looks boring, but your clothes, plastics, phone case, almost all start from here. One barrel of oil looks simple, but at least 50 things you use today exist because of it.
Let's understand how diesel and petrol are obtained from crude oil. First, this type of crude oil is extracted from, then it is poured into a tube called a distillation column, where it evaporates and turns into vapor. The lighter molecules rise to the top, while the heavier molecules remain at the bottom. At the very top is petroleum gas, which is used to fill cylinders. Let's understand how diesel and petrol are obtained from crude oil. First, this type of crude oil is extracted from the ground and heated to 370 degrees Celsius. Then, it is poured into a tube called a distillation column, where it evaporates and turns into vapor. The lighter molecules rise to the top, while the heavier molecules remain at the bottom. At the very top is petroleum gas, which is used to fill cylinders. Below that is gasoline, which is also known as petrol. After that comes naphtha, which is used to make plastic. Just below it is paraffin, which is used to make kerosene. After that, we get diesel. Then comes fuel oil, which is used in factories. After that, we get lubricating oil. Finally, at the very bottom is bitumen, also known as asphalt, which is used to make roads.
Ever wondered how we drill miles beneath the earth to get oil? It's a lot more complicated than digging a water well. drilling mud. But here's the thing. There aren't big underground pools of oil. Crude oil is trapped in porous rock, often under intense Ever wondered how we drill miles beneath the earth to get oil? It's a lot more complicated than digging a water well. A regular water well only goes a few hundred feet deep, but an oil well, that can reach over 7,000 feet. That's more than 1.5 miles underground. It all starts with seismic surveys, using sound waves to map underground rock layers and locate possible oil deposits. Then comes the drilling rig. A giant steel tower spins a diamond-tipped drill bit that crushes through solid rock. To keep the drill cool and bring crushed rock back to the surface, we pump in a high-pressure mixture of mud and water called drilling mud. But here's the thing. There aren't big underground pools of oil. Crude oil is trapped in porous rock, often under intense pressure. To prevent blowouts, we seal the well with layers of steel casing and cement as we drill deeper. When we finally hit the oil-bearing layer, a special perforating gun blasts holes in the casing. So
Well, you mentioned in one of your last talks that petroleum wasn't what we thought it was, that it wasn't a fossil fuel, that it didn't come from fossil animal.
Yeah.
Is it just a mineral? Is it a mineral like any other mineral? Is that how it what would you say? What's the origin of
You see,
petroleum?
when they first found petroleum, because they were beginning to make motors and needed on axles of wheels on railroad trains and all that sort of thing. And remember, trains started in the beginning of the 19th century. Then oil went from just a lubricant to a fuel, and it made it valuable. And Rockefeller happened to be the smartest man in the business at the time, but he made most of his money, or much of it, off the transport of the petroleum as well as selling it. But one thing they realized was, because oil is putting a price on oil is like putting a price on a pail of water. You know, there's no initial cost. It's in the ground, and in those days they were, some of it almost what you'd call surface mining the oil. They didn't go down deep. So in order to get the price up, they hit on the idea that they would have to make it appear to be scarce. That after we take the next few barrels out, we're probably going to have to close as well. You know, that kind of thing. But a very fortuitous event. In 1892, there was a convention in Geneva of scientists to determine what organic substances are. Well, the definition of organic is a substance with hydrogen, oxygen, and carbon. And so it's usually a living substance, a tree. You analyze a dead tree, hydrogen, carbon, and oxygen, and grass, and so on, living things. Animals, we are hydrogen, oxygen, and carbon. So at this Geneva Convention, Rockefeller took advantage of sending some scientists over who said, oil, petroleum, is hydrogen, oxygen, and carbon. Therefore, it must be derived from the spoiling, the rotting of formerly living matter. And playing the game properly, when this scientific convention was over, they defined oil as the residue from formerly living matter. Well, that makes it a fossil fuel. I don't know why they decided to use the word fossil, but it says formerly living matter, it's fossil. Well, of course, today, and another thing we should know is that there has never been a fossil, a real fossil found below 16,000 feet. And you can't argue at 16,000 as a level line because someplace the ground sinks and so on. But 16 is what the scientists say, 16,000. We mine oil, or we drill for oil at 30,000, 33,000, 28,000 every day of the week. So right there, we rule it out that it isn't fossil fuel. It's called fossil fuel for the minds of the public to feel that it is an asset that is running out, being depleted. We talk about depletion allowance, which is a lot of, and actually, if you know the world's oil supply, you know that it is not going to run out for an awfully long time. It is the second most prevalent liquid on Earth. And we haven't begun to dig. Well, with all that background, you see, the people in charge of the petroleum business, for perfectly reasonable business things, just like any other man in the business, wants to keep his price as high as he can get away with. And the way to do is just say, well, there's no more. We the last barrel is going to cost $1,000, and then it's all done. And they preach that stuff. What bothers me is that in geology books, it's in there. The geologists say it's a fossil fuel. They've been bought. I mean, I went to a 4-year federal staff energy seminar run by the government of the United States during the so-called energy crisis. I was the participant that represented the railroad industry. The airline industry was there. Every AA, administrative assistant of senators and congressmen, was there. The CIA was there. The Defense Department was there. The State Department was there. Sometimes sitting right in front of me in the row would be Henry Kissinger with his friend, the head of Department of Defense. It's too bad I can't put the names with them. But anyway, people like that, top men in the government, sitting there listening to the federal staff energy seminar. Well, what this was doing is for 4 years, they were teaching a propaganda line to the leading people in this country, and therefore to the leading people in the world, when you include the Kissinger and Schlesinger, among others. And the object of it was, as Kissinger used in his own terms when it was time for him to speak, to create a world price for oil. In other words, not 30 cents a gallon here and 90 cents a gallon there, but let's get a world price. That's their goal. And they're trying to do that for wheat and everything else. We don't realize what the controls are, whether it's oil or some of these other things. Almost everything today is being categorized at the highest price they can possibly make it go. And so calling petroleum a fossil fuel is the basis for this system with respect to petroleum. And I don't know if the name Arthur Kantrowitz rings any bell. Arthur Kantrowitz is the head of the Kantrowitz Labs set up by the Avco company near Boston, scientific laboratories. And a great man in the scientific world. And Kantrowitz and I were sitting at a table at this seminar once, and the table happened to be all young college grad, PhD geologists. And so just to get a conversation started, I turned to Kantrowitz and I said, Arthur, what do you think about this foolishness of these speakers talking about fossil fuel? And it was kind of put up. He started laughing. He said, that gets me. He says, I don't have a geology degree, but he had 1,000 other degrees. And he said, I don't understand. He said, you'd think that these heads, these other fellows at the table, we did it on purpose, start listening, And he asked, he said, are you gentlemen? He says, you're here at the meeting. Are you gentlemen by any chance geologists? And one fellow, yes, I am. And the other, yeah. He said, well, why don't you tell me? He said, why is oil? And he went on like that. We brought the house down because nobody could argue with Kantrowitz. He like Einstein. People aren't going to. And he told them right there. He said, just drop it. But it's in all the books and in all the papers. But it started from that strange meeting in 1892, a scientific convention. I have a big, thick scientific encyclopedia put out by the Divan Ostrin Company that's about 15 years old now. But it has the whole story of the conference. It doesn't have the Rockefeller part, but it has the whole story of how they straightened out organic chemicals and how it was all figured. And they've got petroleum right in there.
Amazing. So
these aren't accidental things, you see. There's a dollar sign behind almost everything.
What are fossil fuels? And are they really made from more specifically, a stratigrapher and paleontologist? And I taught at the graduate.
Controlling everything from prices to energy to government policy. And no, it's not the banking system, it's not the stock market, it's the petrodollar. For over 50 years, it's been shaping our world. So, what is the petrodollar? To understand the petrodollar, we first need to understand why oil is so important. We use oil to fuel our cars, planes and ships, to transport people and goods around our countries and around the globe. We use it to make plastics. In some countries, we use it to produce electricity. We even use it to manufacture chemicals, fertilizers, and many other everyday products. Our modern economy depends on oil for basically everything. Because oil is so important, countries are constantly buying and selling it. Some countries produce a lot of oil, like Saudi Arabia. Others use a lot but don't produce much, like Japan. This creates a massive global oil market. So, how did the US dollar come to control this global market? To understand this, we need to go back to World War II. At the end of the war, while most of the world lay in ruins, the US emerged with its economy and manufacturing base intact. This led to countries agreeing to make the US dollar the center of the global financial system at the Bretton Woods Conference of 1944. This would be a new world order, backed by the US dollar. The US promised that its dollars could be exchanged for gold, and so other currencies tied their currencies to the dollar. But in 1971, President Nixon decoupled the US economy from the gold standard. This was known as the Nixon shock. This transitioned the world into a fiat currency economy rather than a gold-backed economy. Fiat currency is government-issued money that isn't backed by a physical commodity like gold or silver, and instead gets its value from public trust and economic stability. After the US stopped backing dollars with gold, the dollar stayed dominant because the US economy was so huge, and the US government was considered to be stable. Also, many global transactions were already done in dollars. So, the dollar became what's called the world's reserve currency, meaning countries hold large amounts of it in their central banks. But in 1973, the world experienced the OPEC oil crisis. This was when Arab oil-producing countries stopped selling oil to countries supporting Israel in the Yom Kippur War, including the United States, in order to gain political leverage. This caused oil prices to quadruple, leading to massive shortages and severe inflation in Western economies. In response to this, the US made a major agreement with Saudi Arabia, one of the world's largest oil producers. The deal was simple. Saudi Arabia would sell its oil only in US dollars. In return, the US would provide military protection and support. Since Saudi Arabia was the largest of the oil-producing countries, the other ones soon had to follow suit. This meant that you needed US dollars if you wanted to buy oil from most major producers, no matter where you were in the world. This system is what we call the petrodollar system. Now, here's the big idea. If every country needs oil, and oil is sold in dollars, then every country needs dollars. Imagine you're a country like Japan. You don't produce much oil, but you need oil to power your economy. To buy oil, you must first get US dollars. Second, keep dollar reserves ready. Third, trade with the US or hold US assets. This creates constant global demand for the US dollar, and that demand gives the US major advantages. It keeps the dollar strong because everyone needs dollars. It allows the US government to borrow money more easily and at lower interest rates. And it means the US systems like sanctions to influence other countries because so many international transactions go through US banks. In simple terms, the petrodollar helps keep the US dollar at the center of the world economy. What happens to the oil money that the oil producing countries receive? They don't just store piles of cash, they invest it. This is called petrodollar recycling. For example, oil countries invest in US government bonds. They buy American companies. They invest in real estate and global markets. This means the dollars often flow back into the US financial system. It becomes a loop. First, countries buy oil with dollars. Second, oil producers earn dollars. Third, oil producers invest those dollars back into US assets. And fourthly, the dollar stays strong. So, what's the future of the petrodollar system? In recent years, some countries like Russia, Venezuela, India, and Pakistan have tried to trade oil in other currencies like the euro or the Chinese yuan. This is one of the goals of the BRICS Trade Alliance, which is a partnership of countries that aims to reduce global dependence on the dollar. So, here's the million-dollar question. Why are countries that are hostile to the US still trading oil in dollars? Moving away from the petrodollar system isn't as simple as it sounds. If you suddenly switch currencies, you're not just changing payments, you're disrupting contracts, hedging systems, insurance, and pricing models. The US dollar offers high liquidity, meaning that you can move billions without crashing the market, and it has strong legal protections. It's like when Facebook tried to introduce Threads to compete with Twitter. It's not so easy to suddenly get everyone to move platform when everything's already happening on Twitter. But China and Russia are reducing their dollar use selectively. Recently, Russia has increased oil trade with China in yuan. It's settled some of its transactions in rubles, and it's reduced its US Treasury holdings. China now promotes yuan-denominated oil contracts, and it encourages trade settlements in yuan with its trading partners. But here's the key. They reduce dollar use where it's politically necessary, especially under sanctions, while still using it when it's convenient and efficient. It's a gradual shift, not a revolution. But China's strategy petrodollar system is also using the gold market. You can watch our video just to the left of me here to understand how China is using the gold market to break the global financial grip of the US dollar and how it's causing gold prices to
almost 1 million square kilometers of this desert looking for oil. And after a few years, the bet paid off. And on March 3rd, 1938, in this little patch of coastal desert, they struck gold. Well, actually, they struck oil, but it might as well have been gold. So throughout the 30s and 40s, American oil executives, workers, and The Middle East, the part of Asia that Europeans see as the middle of what they see as the East. Sort of arbitrary, whatever. We call it the Middle East. This part of the world is literally where civilization started, right here in modern-day Iraq. And over the years, the borders here have been redrawn many times as empires have ebbed and flowed through this region. By the way, I didn't make this time lapse. A very talented YouTuber did, and he deserves a medal for it. Or perhaps just a new patron. Thanks, man. Anyway, the most recent carving up of this region happened by European powers. The French, the British, the Russians. I mean, are we surprised? No. Like, of course it was the British. Of course it was the French. Of course it was Europeans. Of course. The lines they drew didn't really take into account language or ethnicity or regional identity. They just sort of sliced it all up amongst themselves and said, these are our new regions of power in the Middle East. Eventually, those European powers left, but the lines they drew stuck around and became the skeleton for what the borders look like today. And this is where our story starts. In the 1930s, here in the modern Middle East. At this point, across the ocean, there was this growing superpower that had spent the last century moving west, taking over this whole continent and beyond deep into the Pacific Ocean. We've talked about that a bit. But things were changing. The world had just fought a brutal world war that was fought with new weapons that were powered by this new important substance, oil. Germany lost that war, in part because they didn't have access to enough oil to keep up with this new style of warfare that relied a lot more on machines. The young superpower realized that access to this stuff would determine who would be powerful and who would not. So they stopped looking west for a moment and turned east with hopes of finding the fuel they needed to build their power. The US presence in the Middle East started with one little dot right here. But soon that dot would expand into a sprawling network of alliances, covert attacks, flows of weapons, money, and the building of innumerable bases, and eventually turning into full-on ground wars. This is how the US stole the Middle East.
Ready and willing to employ all means necessary.
Okay, so it's the 1930s, and the US doesn't have a significant presence in the Middle East at this point. But that's about to change, because there's a company based in California that wants to explore this vast desert for oil.
11,000 miles from San Francisco, there lies a primeval desert, a mass of drifting sand and sun-baked earth, 1/3 the size of the United States.
This was sort of a risky decision for the California company because, first off, they had no idea if there was actually any oil here.
They knew it would mean sinking into the desert the money of thousands of stockholders in a project that might well end in complete loss.
And second off, this desert was a part of a very hardcore religious kingdom.
The fact that Mecca is the source and the shrine of Islam gives Saudi Arabia a central place in the Islamic and therefore the Arab world.
That was home to the holiest sites in Islam, run by a dogmatic royal family that
Bang, bang. Gotcha. 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 So you mean to tell me Saudi Arabia didn't have oil until the people from America went over there and found that oil in the 1900s? So you mean to tell me that Saudi Arabia, the Arabian Peninsula, they don't really own their own oil? They needed the American equipment to get it out the ground. Not only did some people from the United States, from the Americas, actually went over there and dug that shit up themselves. They actually said, hey, we're going to go over here and find some goddamn oil. Damn. So that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. Makes sense why the American dollar overseas is backing that oil, huh? Coming from Saudi Arabia, huh? Because it ain't they shit, huh? It's the motherfuckers who went over there and found that shit.
They don't give a fuck about you talking about this your land, bitch. Did we just land here and build all this shit? We came here looking for some oil. You motherfuckers ain't got no tractors. Let me see your goddamn tank. Yeah, what you gonna do is shut the fuck up. You gonna make everybody come to you and buy this oil, but they gonna need our dollar. You hear me? You hear me? Now we're gonna put Israel over there in a little bit. Since we done found this oil, we're gonna put Israel over here. Now we're gonna have y'all look like y'all fighting and shit. But y'all ain't gonna really be fighting behind closed doors. Y'all gonna be slapping five and shit. We're gonna be that's how we're gonna do it. So we're gonna have Israel over here since we done found the oil over here. I wonder if the Americans put some Saudi princes that came from America in play. I'm just wondering. Is that in the Epstein story? The Yakubian drop is real. So some Americans went over from California to find oil over there. None of the Saudi Arabian oil belongs to the Saudi princes, huh? Huh? You say you found it on their land? I don't think these people care. I don't think they never leave in the Middle East because they are the ones who gave you guys the money over there by having that Saudi Arabian oil be backed by the dollar. Guess who got rich off of that shit? Where's the Aboriginals' money? Because y'all stole our oil and our land here in America. How you go over there and make these motherfuckers rich? Hmm? Now, starting to see that this WWE match is a team match. Somebody's still being cut out of picture here, and it's the Aboriginal of America. Hmm? You went over there, made these people rich. How are we in debt when everybody's using the dollar for so many years? For so many years, people had to use the dollar. How are we not benefiting? Look, I see a lot of people talking about this Yakubian drop right now. Like I said, it's a bigger drop in the background. I'm just so happy the Yakubian drop is causing this flicker to become a flame. Shit. You know what I'm saying? That's what we needed. That is the catapult that will break the camel's back. For them. For them. They want us to know so bad who they are. They big and they bad. How long do you think this charades will last? Why don't you just come out the motherfucking closet? Huh? Why you gotta put everything in a code? But you want us to know who you are, but you hide. You don't think you have shot us down enough mentally, physically? Huh? Stole a lot of our shit here in America. We see what you're doing all around the world. Like I said, we don't know if you're on team with everybody around the world and you're all working against the Aboriginal. But the ones that are working with the Aboriginals, make yourself motherfucking known. This ain't no motherfucking game right now. Hmm? And don't be no fake friends, man. We don't need no fake friends right now. You see what the fuck is going on. If you're gonna switch sides, go ahead and jump on the other side. Be what it is and be jazzy about it. Just know oil is infinite if you got the tools to get it. And they didn't have the tools to get it. What you mean? Kick America out? America owns a lot of these countries. What you mean you gonna stop using the dollar? The paper trail. Let's go. Let's go. Let's go. Let's go.
That did not like outsiders, especially non-believing Westerners. But even still, the king of the Dim eventually gives the California company permission to explore almost 1 million square kilometers of this desert looking for oil. And after a few years, the bet paid off. And on March 3rd, 1938, in this little patch of coastal desert, they struck gold. Well, actually, they struck oil, but it might as well have been gold. So throughout the 30s and 40s, American oil executives, workers, and their families started flocking to the Middle East, establishing the first significant American presence in the region. They set up little cities around the oil operation that were little slices of America, full of the deepest sinful behavior, like allowing women to drive and the consumption of alcohol.
Here is another American colony, complete with air-conditioned houses, 2 hospitals, and an outdoor movie theater.
This is the sort of stuff that is very off limits in Saudi Arabia. It's literally illegal at this point. So you have a lot of Saudis who are not happy about their government letting the Americans in to behave however they want. But the oil kept flowing. And soon the US government goes to the royal family and says, listen, the oil is flowing.
So say it with me one more time, motherfuckers. Who created that whole Arab king prince shit? Huh? Huh? These United States citizens that learned from the Aboriginals in America how to do things. They took that shit and ran with it all the way to Saudi Arabia, the Arabian Peninsula. That's how far they ran with that shit once they learned what we were doing here in America. So you Saudi Arabian jokers didn't get rich until the American Empire made you rich. The United States Empire, excuse me. The United States Empire made you rich. The United States stole. Let me not say stole. The United States learned everything they knew from the Americas before. They didn't learn it in Europe and then go to you guys in Saudi Arabia. No, no, no. You could say some of their family was boated from Europe to Ellis Island, but they learned everything they knew from the Americans. They were not swimming in swimming pools in Europe. They were swimming in swimming pools here in America. They took all that toilet bowl shit over to the Arabian Peninsula and told you motherfuckers, we're gonna put some of our people in y'all motherfucking Saudi Prince robes to make sure y'all ain't trying to steal our oil that we found. Huh? We ain't gonna just be over here with our family on this side. No, bitch, we wanna be in these we about to build some palaces over here. We'll let y'all live in them too. Man, we gotta get something right here. We gotta get something right here. The Americans, the original Americans have been pulling oil up out of the ground without all that machinery. And you better believe we have that machinery. You better believe that you guys better look into you better look into it. You better look into the so-called black people that were already doing their oil thing, trading with the Saudis. This is not a game. You got to check some real shit. Right now, we've been given the Yakubian drop the whole time. From the early 1900s on up. They're talking about fucking Seymour Butt's granddaddy was here in the 1880s. First Ellis Island trip, huh? That sounds like that whole, man, I'm telling you. And that's that eugenics arm. That's the eugenics brain time. That were think tanking that shit. Look what we had now. Oil is infinite if you got the tools to get it.
Flowing better than ever. This is awesome. How about we build a little military base attached to our little oil city so that we can, protect you and protect us and protect the oil and stuff. And the Saudis, okay, having the great Satan come to our country for oil is one thing, but letting them set up a full-on military base on our soil, and especially when everyone in our country is not happy with their presence in the first place. But, said the royal family, all of this oil is really valuable and it's really nice and we're getting super rich. So they're like, yeah, sure, set up the base. But there was one stipulation that the Saudis had for the Americans. You are not allowed to literally plant a flag, no flagpoles of the United States. You cannot put your flag anywhere on this base. Instead, you can put a little plaque on the side of the building so that your flag is not literally on our soil. And that was the deal. And that's exactly what happened. The US sets up its first military operation in the Middle East in the form of a landing strip that is right next to this oil field. Okay, so all of this infrastructure that the Americans were building required someone to build it. They needed a construction company. And there was one construction company that the Americans really liked that helped them build their oil city and their base. This company was founded and run by a guy named Mohammed. Now listen, do you think I'm really giving you the backstory on the construction company that built the air base in the oil city just because that's interesting and I like to talk about construction? No, this is actually very relevant to the story, and you will see why very soon. So the Americans and the Saudis are having this forbidden oil bromance, and it's going really well, and the oil is flowing, everyone's getting rich. And meanwhile, the rest of the Middle East is looking at Saudi Arabia and they're like, dude, WTF, why are you in bed with America? And why are you letting them set up a landing strip in your country? And the Saudi royals are like, do you realize how rich we're getting right now? If you were in our position, you would do the same thing, Egypt. Okay, so it's the 1950s, and let's get back to Mohammed, the construction guy. His company, by this point, is thriving. The American presence in oil land is just exploding, and he is building all of the stuff for it. And so this guy has a giant business. And he starts to have children. Well, in fact, he had a lot of children, 54 children, because he had 22 wives, because that is a thing in Saudi Arabia to this day. Anyway, the point is, one of Mohammed's sons is named Osama. I told you this was going to be relevant. Okay, a reminder that Saudi Arabia is not the entire Middle East. So I'm going to leave the Osama bin Laden cliffhanger for a moment to tell you what else was going on in the Middle East at this time. Remember that it was the hunt for oil that brought the US to Saudi Arabia originally. But now, in the 50s and 60s, there was a new reason for the US to think about the Middle East. And that reason is because there's another big superpower that has nuclear weapons, called the Soviet Union, who is coming into the region and saying to everyone, come join Team Communism. And the US is like, hold my beer. So in addition to oil, the US is now involved in trying to not let the Soviet Union have any power in this region. Over in Iran, there was a democratically elected leader that the US didn't like. They thought he was maybe a little too friendly with the Soviet Union. So they worked together with the British to literally overthrow the government of Iran so that they could install a dictatorial leader that was more friendly to the United States. Little side note here, the airport that I fly out of here in DC is named after the guy who gave the go-ahead for this coup in Iran, John Foster Dulles. So I'm reminded of the whole Iran thing every time I fly. So the US has its oil thing. It's now involved in trying to prop up a dictator in Iran. There's another big thing happening that brings the US into the region, which is that the newly declared state of Israel is starting to piss off its neighbors and starting to look to the US for support. And the US gladly offers it, seeing Israel as a friendly nation in the region that could be a big proponent of US interests. So the US starts to fund Israel with tons of money and fighter jets and all of these things to help them fight their wars against their Arab neighbors. There was a debate happening in the United States on whether or not they should actually do all of this to support Israel so intensely, because they knew if they did, they were going to piss off all of the neighbors in the Middle East. And all of the neighbors are the ones who had
Oil is infinite if you got the tools to get it. So we got the United States goes to the Middle East, recap, bang, bang, hashtag that. Balance on deck. So we got United States first stepping ground in the Middle East, so to speak. 1938, 39, right? Before Israel was created. And we know that the United States had hands in creating Israel from the inception of it. Yes, they did. Trust me. That's another video. So we got, before Israel gets created, we got the United States, California contract created with Saudi Arabia. Before they had money, they were just dust kids. Let's be real, keeping it real. So they had no real history prior to that. This is what puts these guys on the map, bright and early. And we ain't talking OJ, but we're talking OJ bright and early. The brand. So skip to the whole foundation of this United States being in the Middle East is oil. And Saudi Arabia is making a lot of money off the United States being in there. Now the United States has to create these shell companies. That's how these different shell companies start to get rich off of what the United States has went over there and found. And they're using their equipment, and they brought their Americanized ingenuity and engineering to the sands. The motherfuckers brought sand to the sandy beach and increased the profit by selling sand to the beach. So let's back this motherfucker up, because Israel just got there and they already fighting. They just put it on the map. As you can see, my guy also lets you know that they were just carving up the map in the 18 and 1900s. Literally the 1900s, they were just still carving up the map. Literally, we have Israel being created 1942. That's how we know they were still recreating and creating a map that fits their illusion of what they want you to see with their boundary lines. Shit, I ain't in nobody's state of mind. Yeah, that boundary line stuck because that's what you saw on paper and that's where you thought you were on that paper within that boundary line. Forever. Forever you stuck. Get outside the boundary lines. Don't just think outside the box. Get the fuck out the box. Get the fuck out the box. Don't be in the box thinking outside the motherfucker. Take your motherfucking legs and walk the fuck out the box. Huh? What we doing is doing things different. What we doing is doing things with power. What are we gonna make the power? Powerful enough to knock out the goddamn dollar. Huh? See these fools going to fight over this dollar over there. You see this fight with Iran, how it sparked up. It's all over the United States coming in the Middle East saying, hey, bitches, you like the way we're living, huh? You see that flushing toilet? You want that flushing toilet? You want the swim pool, don't you? Huh? You want the swim pool going over there rubbing shit in people's faces, huh? Now you got the Saudi prince who done had 54 kids in 2 years. What you call that? Huh? Huh? I'm gonna say that motherfucker had some hoes on deck. Huh? All of a sudden, a nigga that can pull a cat, then got plenty of pussies. What is going down? What is going up is the plan. And if you ain't catching a whiff of that smoke, you ain't a second-hand man. Yeah. As long as it ain't that Jeffrey, bang, bang. I'm chiefing on it myself. Don't need you to pass me nothing else. Or nothing to begin with. I done told you, bitches, if you hand out anything to me, Richard, I'm kicking your fucking hand. And whatever you had in it's gonna fly across the goddamn street. Cause all is infinite. We got the tools to get it. Watch the play take place. Chess not checkers. WWE match. The origin.
And second off, this desert was a part of a very hardcore religious kingdom.
The fact that Mecca is the source and the shrine of Islam gives Saudi Arabia a central place in the Islamic and therefore the Arab world.
That was home to the holiest sites in Islam, run by a dogmatic royal family that did not like outsiders, especially non-believing Westerners. But even still, the king of the desert kingdom eventually gives the California company permission to explore almost 1 million square kilometers of this desert looking for oil. And after a few years, the bet paid off. And on March 3rd, 1938, in this little patch of coastal desert, they struck gold. Well, actually they struck oil, but it might as well have been gold. So throughout the 30s and 40s, American oil executives, workers, and their families started flocking to the Middle East, establishing the first significant American presence in the region. They set up little cities around the oil operation that were little slices of America, full of the deepest sinful behavior, like allowing women to drive and the consumption of alcohol.
Here is another American colony, complete with air-conditioned houses, 2 hospitals, and an outdoor movie theater.
This is the sort of stuff that is very off limits in Saudi Arabia. It's literally illegal at this point. So you have a lot of Saudis who are not happy about their government letting the Americans in to behave however they want. But the oil kept flowing. And soon the US government goes to the royal family and says, listen, the oil is flowing better than ever. This is awesome. How about we build a little military base attached to our little oil city so that we can, protect you and protect us and protect the oil and stuff. And the Saudis are like, okay, having the great Satan come to our country for oil is one thing, but letting them set up a full-on military base on our soil, and especially when like everyone in our country is not happy with their presence in the first place. But, said the royal family, all of this oil is really valuable and it's really nice and we're getting super rich. So they're like, yeah, sure, set up the base. But there was one stipulation that the Saudis had for the Americans. You are not allowed to literally plant a flag, no flagpoles of the United States. You cannot put your flag anywhere on this base. Instead, you can put a little plaque on the side of the building so that your flag is not literally on our soil. And that was the deal. And that's exactly what happened. The US sets up its first military operation in the Middle East in the form of a landing strip that is right next to this oil field. Okay, so all of this infrastructure that the Americans were building required someone to build it. They needed a construction company. And there was one construction company that the Americans really liked that helped them build their oil city and their base. This company was founded and run by a guy named Mohammed. Now listen, do you think I'm really giving you the backstory on the construction company that built the air base in the oil city just because that's interesting and I like to talk about construction? No, this is actually very relevant to the story, and you will see why very soon. And it's going really well, and the oil is flowing, everyone's getting rich. And meanwhile, the rest of the Middle East is looking at Saudi Arabia and they're like, dude, WTF, why are you like in bed with America? And like, why are you letting them set up a landing strip in your country? And the Saudi royals are like, do you realize how rich we're getting right now? Like, if you were in our position, you would do the same thing, Egypt. Okay, so it's the 1950s, and let's get back to Mohammed, the construction guy. His company, by this point, is thriving. The American presence in oil land is just exploding, and he is building all of the stuff for it. And so this guy has a giant business. And he starts to have children. Well, in fact, he had a lot of children, like 54 children, because he had 22 wives, because that is a thing in Saudi Arabia to this day. Anyway, the point is, one of Mohammed's sons is named Osama. I told you this was going to be relevant. Okay, a reminder that Saudi Arabia is not the entire Middle East. So I'm going to leave the Osama bin Laden cliffhanger for a moment to tell you what else was going on in the Middle East at this time. Remember that it was the hunt for oil that brought the US to Saudi Arabia originally. But now, in the 50s and 60s, there was a new reason for the US to think about the Middle East. And that reason is because there's another big superpower that has nuclear weapons, called the Soviet Union, who is coming into the region and saying to everyone, come join Team Communism. And the US is like, hold my beer. So in addition to oil, the US is now involved in trying to not let the Soviet Union have any power in this region. Over in Iran, there was a democratically elected leader that the US didn't like. They thought he was maybe a little too friendly with the Soviet Union. So they worked together with the British to literally overthrow the government of Iran so that they could install a dictatorial leader that was more friendly to the United States. Little side note here, the airport that I fly out of here in DC is named after the guy who gave the go-ahead for this coup in Iran, John Foster Dulles. So I'm reminded of the whole Iran thing every time I fly. So the US has its oil thing. It's now involved in trying to prop up a dictator in Iran. There's another big thing happening that brings the US into the region, which is that the newly declared state of Israel is starting to piss off its neighbors and starting to look to the US for support. And the US gladly offers it, seeing Israel as a friendly nation in the region that could be a big proponent of US interests. So the US starts to fund Israel with tons of money and fighter jets and all of these things to help them fight their wars against their Arab neighbors. There was a debate happening in the United States on whether or not they should actually do all of this to support Israel so intensely, because they knew if they did, they were going to piss off all of the neighbors in the Middle East. And all of the neighbors are the ones who had the oil. In the end, the US did decide to support Israel. And with that came a major backlash from all of these oil-producing countries in the neighborhood.
There's a crisis of such proportion that we probably haven't even begun to grasp it yet as far as the country is concerned.
Scenes like this are becoming all too common on both sides of the Atlantic. But they tell the Arabs that their oil weapon is wounding America, the country that supports and supplies their enemy Israel.
Eventually, this backlash against supporting Israel kind of calmed down. There was some peace talks. And anyway, let's get back to Mohammed, the construction guy, and his son Osama, because this is where it really starts to heat up.
We decided to put together this compilation of all our Middle East videos because there are transformative events happening in the Middle East right now. The recent attacks on Iran from the US and Israel have reshaped the Middle East and are doing that right now as I'm recording this. And hopefully these videos are providing some context, but keeping up with the headlines is proving to be really difficult because every source comes at it with a different angle and a different bias. This is why I have partnered with Ground News. They are the sponsor of this compilation. And I've been using Ground News for over a year now. They've been a partner of the channel, and I'm really grateful they exist. Ground News is an app and a website that allows you to very quickly and thoroughly compare thousands of headlines from all around the world. It organizes them and breaks them down by what their biases are, their reliability, their factuality, and even tells you who these outlets are owned by. They've been recognized by the Nobel Peace Center for advancing media literacy. And let me just show you how this works and why it matters. Take one event, like the story about Iran's next supreme leader. The strikes on Iran and the killing of the supreme leader in Iran was covered by over 800 outlets, all with different angles. With Ground News, you're able to quickly compare and see how the left and the right are covering it differently. Like, for example, a left-leaning outlet, represented by Fox News, focuses on the political backlash of the attack, framing the critics of these strikes as siding with Iran, or in their words, rooting for the Ayatollah. Every news outlet chooses their narrative. So do we. This is impossible to avoid. What Ground News does is it helps make that visible by allowing you to quickly compare lots of different headlines. I've used the app for years and I'm grateful it exists. It's a kind of comparison that I can't get elsewhere. It's an important part of being a critical consumer of the news. And it's completely subscriber funded. There's no like rich billionaire back there deciding what you see. It's completely funded by all of us who pay for it. If this is interesting to you, you can get in on the Vantage plan, which is the plan I use. You can get 40% off if you go to ground.news/Johnny Harris. You can also scan the QR code.
Oh, it's like the moment of run. Rich. His construction company is giant. His 54 children are also rich. And his son Osama is and is in his 20s and is looking around at all of this stuff happening in Iran and in Israel and is starting to feel really uncomfortable with the notion his government okay with the US so embedded in the Middle East at this point. These are ancient holy lands. Why is my government and my family supporting this great Satan superpower coming government in the middle of Medina, American president? really
% off. It ends up being like $5 a month for you to get the whole picture on the events shaping the world. So with that, let's dive into our next video about the modern Middle East.
And it is this world of religious authority and deeply rooted traditions that is now being challenged by the wealth of oil and the Western invasion it has brought.
So it's now the 70s, and Mohammed bin Laden, the construction guy, is now insanely 54 children, are also rich, and his son Osama is growing up and is in his 20s and is looking around at all of this stuff happening in Iran and in Israel and is starting to feel really uncomfortable with the notion of his family being so supportive of American presence in the Middle East and his government, this religious kingdom, home of Mecca and Medina, being so okay with the US so embedded in the Middle East at this point. These are ancient holy lands. Why is my government and my family supporting this great Satan superpower coming in and becoming so involved in the Middle East? So bin Laden sets out on a lifelong quest to fight back against these superpowers, not just the US, but also the Soviet Union, invading the Middle East. He heads to Afghanistan, where the Soviet Union is invading Afghanistan. Trying to take it over. Bin Laden. This new government takes a bunch of Americans hostage. Really uncomfortable with the notion of his family being so holy lands. Why is my government and my family supporting this great Satan superpower coming in and becoming so involved in the Middle East. So bin Laden sets out on a lifelong quest to fight back against these superpowers, not just the US, but also the Soviet Union invading the Middle East. He heads to Afghanistan, where the Soviet Union is invading Afghanistan, trying to take it over. Bin Laden wants to fight. By the way, same year in Iran, that gets overthrown in a giant religious revolution that dictator and it starts off, and I mean, can you blame them? If someone overthrew the person I elected, I would be pretty pissed too. So anyway, back to bin Laden. He arrives to Afghanistan with a few things. Number one, a bunch of money. Remember, his family's like super rich. He also comes with construction infrastructure because he's like a construction guy. Like his family knows construction and infrastructure building. But most importantly, he comes with an obsessive dedication to fighting back against any superpower that is invading the Middle East. So Osama joins in with all of these rebel fighters who are fighting back against the Soviet Union.